The Clockmaker of Calais. A Hercule Poirot investigation. It was not the sort of morning that promised rest. The sea lay dull and grey beneath a sky the colour of pewter, and a cold wind drifted off the water, carrying with it the scent of salt and something less pleasant, oil perhaps or decay. Gulls wheeled and shrieked above the harbour, and the tide lapped with a sound that might have been whispering. Even I, not inclined to fancies, felt that the town held its breath for something. Hercule Poirot, however, seemed occupied with more practical discomforts. He stood at the end of the pier, immaculate as ever despite the damp air, brushing a speck of dust from his perfectly pressed sleeve. "My dear Hastings," he said at last, "I begin to regret our little excursion. I do not like this place. It smells of disorder." "It's only the sea," I said, laughing. "I can't expect the ocean to polish itself to your standards. Nevertheless, it offends me. It is vast, untidy," and he glanced down distastefully at his patent leather shoes. "Wet." I smiled, though something in the stillness of the town pressed against my thoughts. Calais in March was not the lively port one reads of in summer pamphlets. The shutters were drawn on half the shops, and the few figures that passed us did so with their collars turned up and their eyes down. The town had the look of a place waiting for news. "Come, Poirot," I said, "you promised yourself a holiday. No crime, no corpses, only sea air and quiet." He looked unconvinced. "When one promises quiet, mon ami, fate laughs. I know this from experience. The moment I unpack my socks, someone dies." I chuckled, though perhaps not entirely at ease. We took rooms at the Hôtel du Nord, a modest place overlooking the harbour. The proprietor, a solemn woman in a black dress, greeted us with the weary courtesy of one who had long since ceased to expect cheerful guests. "You will find Calais very peaceful, gentlemen," she said. "There is little to do and less to see." "Peaceful," murmured Poirot, his eyes narrowing. "That is a word with many meanings." That evening, after a supper of fish stew that did nothing to improve his temper, Poirot settled himself in the lounge with a newspaper. I was content to smoke my pipe and watch the fire, but the quiet was soon broken by the arrival of a waiter bearing coffee. A thin young man with a nervous smile, he hovered near us longer than necessary. "Not many visitors this time of year," I remarked pleasantly. "No, monsieur." "Only a few, and of course everyone talks about the same thing." Poirot looked up. "Ah, and what is that, my friend?" "The Clockmaker," the man said. His voice dropped a little, as though the word itself carried weight. "Monsieur Morel, you will hear his name soon enough." Poirot folded his paper neatly. "A clockmaker. I am fond of the precision of such men. They remind me of myself." The waiter smiled uneasily. "Monsieur Morel is not like other men. They say he works all night, never sleeping, that he talks to his clocks. Some say he has built one that will outlive us all, made of gold." "Indeed?" Poirot's eyebrows lifted. "And does he intend to keep it?" The young man shrugged. "No one knows. He hides it from everyone. Some say he is afraid. Others, that he is waiting for someone to take it." There was a faint crash from the kitchen, and he excused himself hurriedly. Poirot stared into the fire for a moment, then gave a small satisfied nod. "You observe, Hastings, the tone of dread. Even gossip carries a rhythm. It is the tick of the mystery before it begins." "Oh, come now," I protested. "A lonely old man with a workshop hardly makes for intrigue." Poirot smiled, the corners of his moustache curving upwards. "And yet already he has entered our conversation. Remember this moment, mon ami, the first chime of a clock whose hour we do not yet know." The following morning dawned clearer, though the chill remained. We set out to explore the town, its cobbled streets echoing under our steps. Everywhere we went we saw the mark of the clockmaker. Shop signs in need of repair, watches in dusty windows, the tall tower at the square with its proud iron hands. Time ruled here, and yet there was something oddly out of time about Calais, as though its heart had stopped ticking years before. We were standing by the sea-wall, admiring the gulls swooping above the tide, when Poirot stiffened suddenly. "You hear that?" "Hear what?" "Nothing." "Exactly nothing. Even the sea is holding its breath." I laughed, but then I too noticed it, the stillness that sometimes precedes an uproar. And sure enough, a cry rang out from along the quay. A fisherman, his boots slick with seaweed, came running, shouting for help. By the time we reached the spot, a crowd had gathered near the edge of the harbour. Poirot pushed through gently, his manner brisk but polite. On the ground lay a man's body, half covered by a tarpaulin. The inspector on duty turned, annoyance giving way to recognition as Poirot presented his card. "Ah, Poirot, I have read of you. Inspector Lefebvre at your service." Poirot inclined his head. "A pleasure, though I regret the circumstance." "What has happened?" "An accident, it seems. A gentleman found this morning at the water's edge. He may have fallen from the quay after dark." Poirot knelt, peering beneath the tarpaulin. The dead man was middle-aged, smartly dressed, his face calm, almost serene. But something in his posture struck me as odd. He looked not tumbled by the sea, but placed. Then I saw it. A golden watch lying near his hand, open, its chain tangled in the fabric of his coat. The sunlight caught on its surface, flashing like an eye. Poirot's hand hovered above it. "You have noted the time." Lefebvre bent closer. 4:17. Poirot's expression sharpened. "And when precisely was the body found?" 6:30. The tide had just begun to fall. "The tide does not stop for sentiment," murmured Poirot. "And yet this watch it has stopped, quite precisely, curious." He lifted it carefully. The watch was heavy, exquisitely made, its casing etched with fine detail. Vines, leaves, and there, near the hinge, a tiny engraved star. I saw Poirot's eyes narrow at the sight. "Inspector, I do not wish to intrude upon your work, but this piece, it is remarkable. I have heard tell of a clockmaker here, a certain Monsieur Morel." Lefebvre nodded. "The same man. He's known throughout the town. Keeps to himself these days, with only his daughter for company. And this poor fellow?" Poirot gestured toward the body. "Albert Dering, an English businessman. Been here a week or two. Lodged at the Hôtel de la Mer, no sign of robbery. His purse and papers were untouched." "Ah," said Poirot softly. "A robbery where nothing is taken. A watch that stops before its master. The plot, Hastings, begins to thicken already." I bent to look closer. "Perhaps the sea damaged it." "Non," said Poirot, forgetting himself and slipping briefly into French. "No, my friend, he water leaves marks. This one has none. It was stopped by intention." He rose, brushing sand from his trousers, and regarded the grey waves with an expression I knew well, the look of a man already halfway to solving what others could not yet name. That evening, back at our hotel, Poirot was uncharacteristically restless. He paced the floor, his hands behind his back, while the wind rattled the window panes. "Tell me, Hastings," he said abruptly, "what do you make of the time?" 4:17. "I make of it that the watch stopped there." "Precisely. But why there?" "Time has meaning. That number will matter." "I am certain of it." He paused, frowning. "And that little star upon the casing, a maker's mark, no doubt. It will lead us to the craftsman." "You mean Monsieur Morel?" "Yes, and tomorrow we shall visit him. For now let us consider. A man dies by the sea. A golden timepiece lies beside him, stopped at an hour no one can explain. What do we have?" "A mystery," I said. Poirot smiled faintly. "A machine wound too tightly, Hastings. When the tension breaks, then comes the explosion." He crossed to the window and stared out at the dark harbour. The tide had turned, the waves retreating with slow reluctance. Somewhere in the distance a clock struck the quarter hour. Poirot listened until the last note faded. "There," he murmured. "You hear it?" "The clocks of Calais, all keeping time, yet somewhere one of them has already stopped." The following morning broke clear and sharp, with a mist rising from the harbour like steam from a kettle. The town was already stirring. Fishermen shouting, gulls screaming, the bells of the church marking the hour in mournful tones. From our window, the sea looked deceptively peaceful, a vast grey mirror that gave nothing away. Poirot was immaculate as ever, seated at the breakfast table with an air of calm concentration, though I noticed that his toast remained untouched and his coffee had gone cold. His mind clearly was elsewhere. "You have not slept," I said. "You were pacing half the night." "Ah, Hastings, when a puzzle begins to take shape, one cannot sleep until one has placed the corner pieces. Already I see the outline." "Outline of what?" "Of a crime, naturellement. The watch, it troubles me. Time, my friend, is exact, but murder seldom is. They rarely match as neatly as 4 and 17. He glanced toward the window, where the light was growing stronger. You have the inspector's permission, yes? We may visit the clockmaker this morning. I nodded. Lefebvre, though wary of Poirot's methods, had been only too glad to accept his offer of assistance. The case, as he put it, had already begun to draw attention. A dead Englishman and a golden watch made for scandal in a quiet town. The workshop of Jacques Morel stood near the far end of the quay, a narrow, leaning building with its upper windows covered in grime and its door painted a peeling blue. A wooden sign in the shape of a clock hung above the entrance, its pendulum swaying slightly in the morning breeze. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of oil and brass. Everywhere one looked, there were clocks, tall, short, round, square, clocks with painted faces, clocks that chimed, clocks that ticked softly like breathing. The sound filled the room, 100 different rhythms overlapping until the effect was almost hypnotic. Behind a cluttered counter sat an old man bent over a magnifying glass. He was small and slight, with wisps of white hair and a face lined by years of delicate work. His fingers, though trembling slightly, moved with remarkable precision over the tiny gears and springs before him. Poirot coughed gently. Monsieur Morel. The man looked up, startled. His eyes, magnified behind thick lenses, were pale and watery. Yes, who are you? My name is Hercule Poirot. This is my associate, Captain Hastings. We come on behalf of the police. There has been an unfortunate event. An event? The man's hands froze above the open mechanism. What kind of event? Poirot's tone was soft. A man was found dead yesterday morning by the harbour. An Englishman. A watch was discovered beside him, a golden watch of singular design bearing a small star upon its clasp. Morel's face drained of colour. For a moment he seemed unable to speak. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "It was mine." "Yours?" I exclaimed. He nodded slowly, his hands shaking so that a tiny gear fell from his fingers onto the table. "It was stolen from me 3 nights ago. My masterpiece. Gone." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "You reported the theft?" No, I did not." The clockmaker seemed to shrink into himself. "It was my fault. I had been careless. I trusted my apprentice, a foolish boy. He left suddenly, without a word. I thought he had taken it. I did not wish to involve the police. There has been enough gossip." "Gossip?" I asked. Morel gave a weak smile. "They call me mad, monsieur. They say I care more for my clocks than for people. Perhaps they are right." Poirot regarded him closely. "And this apprentice is, what was his name?" "Lucas Brunet. 17, perhaps 18. A clever boy, but restless. He wanted to make his own way. I had not the heart to stop him." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "And yet, Monsieur Morel, your watch has found its way to the side of a dead man. That cannot be coincidence." The old man closed his eyes briefly, as though the thought pained him. "It was cursed from the beginning," he murmured. "Everything I make bears sorrow." A sound at the doorway made us turn. A young woman stood there, tall and fair, with a calm expression that did not quite conceal her anxiety. Her eyes were grey, thoughtful eyes that looked as if they had seen too much of the world already. "Papa?" she said softly. "Is everything all right?" Poirot stepped forward, bowing slightly. "Mademoiselle Morel, I presume." She nodded, glancing from him to her father. "You are here about the watch, I suppose?" "Everyone is." "Indeed," said Poirot. "And also about the man who died." Her face tightened. "Mr. Daring. You knew him?" "Yes," she said quietly. "He was a collector of fine pieces, a customer of ours. He admired my father's work, and visited often when he was in Calais. He was kind, always polite." "I cannot believe he is dead," Poirot observed her keenly. "And yet he is, mademoiselle." "When did you last see him?" She hesitated. 2 days ago. He came to speak with my father. They were alone for some time. I thought they were discussing business." "Did you hear what they said?" "No." A faint flush rose to her cheeks. "I do not eavesdrop, monsieur." Poirot smiled slightly. "Of course not. You are a dutiful daughter, and yet, forgive me, your father seems Uneasy. She glanced at the old man, who had returned to his workbench, his hands trembling. He has not been well. He worries over his clocks, over money, over everything. He works too much. That is all. Poirot looked about the room, noting the careful disorder, the piles of gears, the stacks of sketches, the tools laid out in mathematical precision. A fine craftsman, he murmured. And yet, Hastings, do you observe? Not one clock here shows the same time. I looked round. It was true. Some read 10 minutes past 10, others 9:30, still others 11:15. The ticking seemed suddenly discordant, as though the entire room was slightly out of step with itself. It must drive you mad, I said. Elise smiled faintly. My father refuses to wind them all at once. He says it reminds him that perfection belongs only to God. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ha! A philosopher as well as an artist. He turned back to Morel, who was staring blankly at the desk. Monsieur, one more question, if you please. Why a star? What does it signify, this mark upon your watch? Morel blinked as though pulled from a dream. A star, it is my signature. My wife used to say my clocks were like constellations, each one a world of its own. After she died, I marked every piece with a star for her. There was silence. Elise looked down, and I thought I saw tears glint in her eyes. Poirot inclined his head gravely. I thank you, monsieur. That is all for now. But we may need to speak again. Outside, the sky had darkened, the mist rolling back in from the sea. Poirot paused on the cobbled street, adjusting his hat against the wind. Well, Hastings, what do we think of our clockmaker? I shrugged. A harmless old man, worn thin by grief and work. His daughter seems honest enough. Poirot smiled without warmth. Honest, perhaps, but not truthful. There is a difference. You believe she lied? I believe, said Poirot, that she told us only half the truth. Her voice trembled when I named Daring. And the father's story of a stolen watch. Pah! Convenient, is it not? He claims it was taken only days before it appears beside a dead man. Too neat, my friend, too neat. Then you think Morel is involved? Poirot stopped walking and looked out toward the water. Involved, yes. But as what? Victim, witness, or culprit, that remains to be seen. That afternoon we returned to the harbour to meet Inspector Lefebvre. He was standing by the sea-wall, smoking thoughtfully. Well, Monsieur Poirot, he said, have you found our murderer yet? Poirot smiled. You are impatient, my dear Inspector. Murder is like a clock. If you rush to the hour, you miss the chime. Tell me, have you learned anything new about our dead man? Lefebvre nodded. Albert Daring, an importer of fine goods, came here frequently, had business with several local craftsmen, including Morel. According to the hotel staff, he dined alone most nights, but received a visitor 2 evenings ago, a young woman. Poirot's eyes lit up. Ah, and her name? They did not know. She wore a dark coat and left before midnight. Poirot murmured something under his breath, perhaps an oath, perhaps a calculation. Between midnight and 2, the time of death. Hastings, note that. He turned back toward the town, his expression set. We have, I think, the beginnings of a pattern. A craftsman haunted by the past. A daughter too calm, a lover perhaps betrayed. The watch stopped at 4:17, a time which has meaning to someone. We shall find to whom it belonged, and when we do, the hands of this mystery will begin to move. As we walked back along the quay, the tide rose again, covering the stones where Daring's body had lain. The sea erased its traces as if eager to hide the evidence, but Poirot, gazing into the grey distance, only smiled faintly. Nature may conceal her crimes, Hastings, he said, but man, alas, never so well. Inspector Lefebvre was not a man to be easily impressed. Tall, square-jawed, and perpetually impatient, he had the look of someone who considered the world an untidy place that required constant sweeping. He tolerated Poirot with an air of amused condescension, the way a practical man indulges a theorist whose brilliance he does not quite trust. That afternoon, we met him at the police station, a low whitewashed building near the harbour that smelt of tobacco and damp paper. He greeted us with brisk civility and motioned for us to sit. On the desk before him lay a small collection of objects in labelled envelopes. The effects of your Mr. Daring, he said. We have gone through them thoroughly, but perhaps your famous little grey cells will see more than mine. Poirot inclined his head. You flatter me, Inspector. Let us see what the dead man carried into eternity. Lefebvre opened each envelope in turn. A wallet containing a few French francs, a return ferry ticket to Dover, a small notebook filled with neat figures and abbreviated notations, a pair of cufflinks shaped like anchors, and a key attached to a tag marked Room 7, Hôtel du Fer. The final item was the golden watch, now cleaned of its bloodstains and resting on a piece of velvet. It gleamed dully in the lamplight, its casing engraved with delicate filigree, its face cracked where it had struck the stones. Poirot leaned forward, examining it with reverent attention. "A marvel of craftsmanship," he murmured. "See, Hastings, how the escapement is modified. Morel is a genius. But tell me, Inspector, why was it open when found?" "Open?" "Yes." The cover was unlatched, the hand stopped at 417. "Yet the mechanism inside is intact. Someone opened it deliberately." Lefebvre shrugged. "Perhaps Deering looked at the time as he fell." Poirot shook his head gently. "No, mon ami. A man does not check his watch in the instant of death." "Then the murderer?" "Possibly. Or perhaps it was opened after the deed, to mark something or to remove something small." Lefebvre snorted. "A romantic theory. I prefer facts." "Then let us examine your facts," said Poirot pleasantly. The inspector tapped the notebook. "In here we found records of transactions, purchases, commissions, payments. Deering was in Calais to collect a consignment of crafted goods, including the clockmaker's watch. He met with Morel 2 nights ago, paid him, and arranged to fetch the piece the following day. Instead, he ends up dead by the sea." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "You are certain the payment was made?" "Yes, a receipt signed by Morel was among the papers. I have it here." He handed it over. Poirot studied the small slip of paper with keen interest. The handwriting was firm, deliberate. "Received from Mr. Albert Deering the sum of 2,000 francs for commissioned work. Signed Jacques Morel. The date was 2 days before the murder." "The sum is considerable," I said. "Indeed," replied Poirot. "Enough to buy silence or guilt." Lefebvre folded his arms. "To my mind, it's simple. Deering pays for the watch. Morel delivers it late, they quarrel, tempers rise, and the old man kills him, perhaps accidentally. He panics, flees, and later invents the story of theft to save his name." Poirot smiled faintly. "It is neat, yes. But like a clock that runs too perfectly, it cannot be trusted. Real life does not tick so smoothly. You think I'm wrong?" "I think you are premature." The inspector shrugged, lighting a cigarette. "We have witnesses. A fisherman saw a man near the quay that night, around the hour of 4. A small man wearing a dark coat and hat. Fits Morel's description exactly." "Ah," said Poirot softly. "But you forget, my dear Inspector. Many men in Calais are small and wear dark coats. You will find half the town guilty by such reasoning." "Nevertheless," Lefebvre said, blowing out smoke, "we've put a constable near Morel's house. If he tries to run, we shall know." Poirot smiled. "It is good. Keep your net ready, but perhaps it will catch another fish entirely." When we left the station, the fog was thickening again, curling round the street lamps like smoke. The bells of the church tolled 5. Poirot walked briskly, his head bowed, muttering under his breath. At last I said, "You don't believe Morel did it, then?" "No. He's a man who kills time, not men. He loves his creations too much to ruin them with blood." "Yet," he paused, his expression distant, "there is something he fears. Did you see how he trembled when we mentioned Dering's name?" "Yes, guilt perhaps, or terror. The two, they are close cousins." But of what was he afraid? "That, my friend, we must learn." We turned into the narrow street that led back to the inn. Halfway along, Poirot stopped abruptly. Across the cobbles, a figure was standing motionless in the shadow of a doorway, slight, hunched, and watching us intently. Before I could speak, Poirot raised a hand. "Do not startle him, Hastings. Observe the posture, the height, the nervousness. A youth, I think." The figure shifted, then disappeared down an alley with a quick, furtive movement. "After him!" I cried. We gave chase, but the fog swallowed him. By the time we reached the end of the alley, only the echo of footsteps remained. Poirot stopped, breathing lightly but untroubled. "So," he said softly, "our little shadow grows bold. That was not a thief, Hastings. That was curiosity. The curiosity of one who fears discovery. You think it was the apprentice, Brenet? I would stake my moustache upon it, Poirot smiled, and a very valuable wager that would be. That evening we took dinner at the inn, a simple affair of stew and bread, though Poirot's fastidious tastes made him sigh heavily. As we ate, he remained silent, lost in thought, his fingers tracing invisible lines upon the tablecloth as though mapping the crime. At last he said, "Hastings, let us arrange the pieces, n'est-ce pas? We have a dead man with a golden watch, stopped at 4:17, a clockmaker who claims it was stolen, an apprentice who vanishes, a daughter who hides something, and a visitor in the night, a woman who came and went unseen." I nodded. "That sounds like the start of one of your puzzles." "It is not the start," he said quietly. "It is the middle. Something began long before Dering's death. Something to do with that watch. I must see his hotel room." We went at once. The Hôtel du Phare was a modest building facing the sea, its corridors narrow and carpet worn thin. The proprietor, a solemn man in a waistcoat, recognized Poirot instantly. "Ah, monsieur, the police have already been. But of course for you, anything." Room 7 was small but neatly kept. The bed had been stripped, and the drawers emptied by the police. Only one thing remained, a faint, lingering scent, lavender and smoke, distinctly feminine. Poirot went straight to the window, inspecting the latch and frame. "No sign of forced entry," he murmured. Our visitor was expected. He knelt beside the small desk. The blotting pad was still there, though the top sheet had been removed. Poirot lifted it to the light, smiling as faint impressions appeared. Ah, the ghost of a letter. He took a pencil and began to shade gently over the surface. Slowly faint words emerged in mirrored relief. "Meet me by the quay at 4. We must talk before he finds out." "Good heavens!" I exclaimed. "That's the hour of the murder!" "Just so," said Poirot. "A rendezvous, but with whom? He must not find out. Who? Morel, the apprentice, or someone else entirely?" He tapped the note thoughtfully. "We must find the writer of this letter. The hand is firm but elegant. A woman's, certainly." "Elise Morel?" I asked. He gave me a long, searching look. "Perhaps. Or perhaps another woman entirely, one we have not yet met." Outside, the sea crashed against the quay with increasing fury. As we walked back toward the inn, rain began to fall, turning the cobblestones slick beneath our feet. Poirot pulled his coat tighter and spoke only once. "Hastings," he said, "there are crimes born of greed, of jealousy, of madness. But this one has the taste of regret. Remember that." He paused under a gas lamp, its yellow light catching the glint of water on his bowler hat. "Tomorrow we visit the watchmaker again. I think the time has come, quite literally, to set the clocks right." And as the wind howled across the harbour and the rain hissed down, I could not help but feel that somewhere in that small sleeping town, someone was listening, and waiting for their own hour to strike. The following day dawned bleak and windswept, the kind of morning that seems to warn against enterprise. Gulls wheeled over the harbour like scraps of torn paper, and the tide slapped restlessly against the sea wall. Calais, for all its cheer in daylight, seemed grey and watchful now, as though the town itself were holding its breath. Poirot was already awake when I came down, perfectly dressed, his moustache gleaming like a pair of silver commas. He was sipping hot chocolate with an air of contentment that I found irritatingly serene. "You are cheerful this morning," I remarked. "But naturally, mon ami. The sun may hide, but my little grey cells, they sparkle as always. Today we shall find our missing boy." "You mean the apprentice?" Poirot nodded. "Lucas Brenet, a shadow in the fog, a ghost in the story. He is the hand that moves the mechanism, though he does not yet know it himself." "You believe he saw something?" "I believe," said Poirot thoughtfully, "that he knows why Dering died, even if he does not understand how." We set out for the old quarter of the town, where the narrowest streets wound between leaning houses that seemed to whisper against each other in the wind. There, behind the church, we found the workshop closed and shuttered. The faded blue door bore a scrap of paper pinned by a rusty nail, "Closed for repairs." Poirot tapped it gently with his cane. "Closed, yes, but by whose hand, I wonder? Morel's or another's?" He tried the latch. It yielded easily. The door creaked open, revealing darkness and the heavy smell of oil and brass. Inside, the clock stood silent. Not one ticked. It was as though time itself had died overnight. Poirot moved carefully among them, his eyes taking in every detail. A chair overturned, a drawer half open, a scattering of gears on the floor. He bent down, picking up a small scrap of coarse brown paper. "From a parcel," he murmured. "See the edges, Hastings? Torn hastily, and the smell tobacco. Our apprentice smokes, I think." He crossed to the workbench. "And here, a note." He lifted a small folded sheet wedged beneath a gear wheel. It was stained with grease, the writing hurried and uneven. "Monsieur Morel, I am sorry. I did not mean for this to happen. I must go before they find me. Tell Elise I tried to make it right." It was unsigned, but the boyish scrawl left no doubt. Poirot read it twice, then folded it neatly. "Ah, Hastings, guilt, fear, remorse, the trifecta of youth. Lucas Brenet is not our murderer, but he runs from something dangerous. The question is, from whom?" I looked around the workshop uneasily. Could Morel be hiding him? "Perhaps," said Poirot. "Or perhaps he hides from Morel." He paused beside a tall clock whose pendulum had stopped mid-swing. "Observe, mon ami. This clock is set at 4:17. Again, always 4:17. There is meaning here." A time frozen repeated. Why? What happened at that hour to stop the heart of every clock in this affair? He straightened abruptly. "Come, we must speak with Elise. We found her in the small garden behind the house, hanging washing on a line that swayed in the wind. Her hands were red from the cold, but she worked quickly, her face pale and tense. When she saw us, she stiffened. 'Monsieur Poirot,' she said, 'you should not be here. My father is unwell. I am sorry to hear it, mademoiselle. May we speak only a few moments?' She hesitated, then nodded. 'Very well.' Poirot's tone was gentle. 'We have been to the workshop. It is closed?' 'Yes.' She looked away. 'Papa cannot work now. The shock of all this, it has broken him.' 'He is not there,' Poirot said softly. 'Where is he, Mademoiselle Morel?' She hesitated, then pressed her lips together. 'He went out early. I do not know where. A pity. And Lucas Brenet, your father's apprentice. Have you heard from him?' Her eyes flickered. 'No,' she said quickly. 'Not since he left.' Poirot regarded her in silence for a moment. 'Mademoiselle, lying does not become you. You are kind, too kind, perhaps, but the truth, it weighs upon you.' She turned away, gripping the clothesline. 'Lucas is frightened,' she said in a low voice. 'He came last night, only for a moment. He said he was leaving Calais, that he could not stay. I begged him to tell me what had happened, but he only said that Mr. Dering was dead because of him.' Poirot's eyes gleamed. 'Did he say where he was going?' She shook her head. 'Only that he would try to cross to England.' 'The ferry?' I asked. 'No, he has a cousin who works on one of the cargo boats. It sails this afternoon.' Poirot bowed slightly. 'Merci, mademoiselle. You have been most helpful.' As we turned to go, she caught his sleeve. 'Monsieur Poirot, please do not let them arrest my father. He is a good man. He could never.' Poirot placed a hand over hers. 'Courage, mademoiselle. The truth has its own hour. We shall not let it strike the wrong one.' By the time we reached the harbour, the wind had strengthened, carrying salt spray and the smell of tar. A line of ships lay at anchor, their masts swaying like reeds. Poirot's gaze swept over them with precision. 'There,' he said, pointing to a rust-red cargo vessel loading crates. 'La Belle Aimée. If the boy plans to stow away, that is his best chance. Small crew, irregular inspection.' We moved down the quay, the planks slick underfoot. A group of sailors were shouting, heaving a rope into place. Among them, I spotted a thin youth in a cap, his face half hidden. Even from a distance, there was something anxious in the set of his shoulders. Poirot touched my arm. 'Patience, Hastings. Let the little fish swim into the net.' We waited until the sailors dispersed, then approached. The boy turned sharply, eyes wide. It was indeed Lucas Brenet, pale, unshaven, and terrified. 'Lucas Brenet,' said Poirot quietly, 'you have been most difficult to find.' 'I don't know you,' the boy stammered, stepping back. 'Leave me alone.' 'Ah, but you do. I am Hercule Poirot, and I seek only the truth. You, mon garçon, are in danger, not from me, but from whoever killed Mr. Dering.' The name struck him like a blow. 'I didn't mean to. He stopped himself, breathing hard. "I didn't kill him." "I know," said Poirot calmly. "But you know who did." The boy shook his head violently. No, I swear, I just gave him the watch." "The golden one?" I asked. "Yes, he paid for it himself, but then," he swallowed hard. "Then he said he couldn't take it. That it was wrong, that he'd made a mistake. He told me to bring it back to Monsieur Morel and say he was sorry, but before I could, someone else came." "Who?" Poirot's voice was like silk. "I don't know. I heard voices, angry voices, a man and a woman. Then a shout. I ran. Later I saw him on the stones by the water, dead." His voice cracked. "I didn't mean to leave him. I was scared." Poirot's eyes were gentle now. "You did what many would do. But listen, Lucas, this man and woman, did you recognize them?" The boy hesitated. "The man, no." "The woman, she wore a scarf. I couldn't see her face. But I think," he faltered. "Go on." "I think it was Mademoiselle Elise." I stared at him. "That's impossible." But Poirot said nothing. His gaze was fixed on the boy, unreadable. "You are certain?" "I'm not sure," Lucas whispered. It was dark, and the fog. Poirot nodded slowly. "It is enough. You have done well, mon petit. Now you must not go aboard this ship. The murderer will look for you there." Lucas frowned. "Why would they care about me?" "Because," said Poirot softly, "you hold the final piece, the secret that connects Dering's death, the golden watch, and the hour of 4:17. The boy looked confused, frightened, but Poirot's calm seemed to steady him. "Go to the church," he said. "Wait there until I come. Tell no one you have seen us." Lucas nodded and hurried away, disappearing into the maze of alleys. I turned to Poirot. "You don't believe Elise killed Dering?" "Non, mon ami, but someone wants it to seem so. We are being led carefully, like mice into a clockwork trap." He glanced back toward the quay where the waves beat against the hulls. 4:17, Hastings. "I begin to see." The watch stopped not at the moment of death, but at the moment of betrayal. He smiled slightly, though there was no warmth in it. "Tomorrow we shall speak again with Elise Morel and her father. I think the hour has come for one of them to tell the truth." The next morning broke with a storm that swept across the town like a living thing. Rain lashed the windows, wind rattled the shutters, and the sea beyond the harbour rose in angry grey-green waves. Even Poirot, who usually admired the precision of nature's tempests, frowned as he buttoned his coat. "An ill wind, Hastings," he murmured. "It blows secrets ashore." He insisted that we walk to the Morel house on foot. The streets were slick and nearly deserted, save for the occasional fisherman battling against the wind. The old workshop loomed at the end of the lane, its shutters banging loosely, the faded blue paint flaking like old parchment. When Elise answered the door, she looked pale and strained, as though she had not slept. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I told you, Papa is unwell." "All the more reason for us to see him," said Poirot gently. "Her sickness of the body is often cured by the truth of the soul, n'est-ce pas?" She hesitated, then stepped aside. "Very well. But please be kind. He has been through so much." The sitting room was small but tidy, its air thick with the faint smell of oil and sea salt. Jacques Morel sat near the fire, a blanket over his knees, his thin hands trembling slightly as he turned an old pocket watch over and over in his fingers. He looked older than when we had last seen him, shrunken even, but his eyes still burned with that sharp, nervous light of the craftsman. Poirot bowed. "Monsieur Morel, forgive our intrusion. I come not as a policeman, but as a seeker of order, of balance." Morel gave a weary laugh. "Balance? There is none. Time is the only master now. Everything else is chaos." Poirot seated himself opposite him. "Then let us restore some measure of order, shall we? I have come to speak of the watch, and of the hour of 4:17. The old man's hand jerked violently. The watch dropped to the rug with a soft thud. Elise gasped, moving quickly to retrieve it, but Poirot raised a hand. "No need, mademoiselle. Let it rest where it has fallen. Perhaps it will remind your father that all things, even guilt, must find their place." Morel's eyes narrowed. "What are you implying, Monsieur Poirot?" "That the watch which lay beside Albert Dering was not stolen, but given by you." Elise drew in a sharp breath. "Monsieur," Poirot continued, unperturbed, "you told us the watch was your masterpiece, and I do not doubt it. But it was not meant for sale, was it? It was made for Daring himself. A commission, yes, but more than that. A message." Morel's voice was hoarse. "You do not understand." "On the contrary," said Poirot quietly, "I understand very well. The mark of the star, your wife's symbol, the same star Daring had engraved upon his walking stick. You shared something, you two, as grief, perhaps, or guilt. But the watch was more than a timepiece. It was a reminder." Elise rose abruptly. "Stop! You have no right." Poirot turned to her, his gaze piercing but kind. "Mademoiselle, you wish to protect your father, yes? You love him, that I see. But the truth will destroy neither of you. It will destroy only the lie that binds you." She hesitated, trembling. "What lie?" Poirot's voice softened. "That Albert Daring was only your father's customer. He was more, much more. He was your mother's brother." A stunned silence followed. Elise stared at him, her lips parted. "Her brother?" Morel bowed his head into his hands. "It is true," Poirot nodded gently. "Your wife, Monsieur Morel, was English. She fled her home in London to marry you against her family's wishes. When she died, her brother Albert Daring sought you out, perhaps to make amends, perhaps to ease his conscience. He commissioned the golden watch as a gesture of reconciliation," Elise whispered. "I never knew." "No," said Poirot. "You were too young. Your father kept it from you. But when Daring came to Calais this last time, he wished to reveal himself to you. And your father forbade it." Morel's hands gripped the arm of his chair. "He had no right." She was gone, and he had disowned her. He called her foolish, reckless, and a disgrace. He could not come back after all those years and claim affection. "And so you made him the watch," Poirot said softly, "as both gift and warning. The hour of 4:17, the exact time of your wife's death. You wanted him to remember what his pride had cost." The old man's breath came shallowly. "It was all I could give him, a piece of time he could never undo." Elise pressed a hand to her mouth. "Papa." Poirot's tone grew gentler still. "But there was another who knew of this meeting, the apprentice, Lucas Brenet. He delivered the watch to Daring and overheard part of your conversation, yes? And when he realized Daring was your wife's brother, he tried to make things right by warning Elise. That is why he came to her last night." Elise nodded slowly, her eyes filling with tears. "He said something about family, about forgiveness. I thought he was rambling." Poirot leaned forward. "Then something else happened. Daring left the workshop that night, remorseful, intending to meet Elise by the quay, perhaps to tell her the truth himself." "But someone followed him." Morel looked up sharply. "No." Poirot's gaze held his. "Yes, monsieur, you followed him. You meant only to speak, perhaps to stop him, but in your anger you struggled. He fell, struck his head upon the stones. It was an accident, but you fled." The old man shook his head violently. No, I didn't mean." Elise gave a cry and dropped to her knees beside him. "Papa, oh papa!" Poirot rose and walked slowly to the window. Rain streamed down the glass, tracing lines like tears. The golden watch fell from his hand as he died. "You opened it, intending to stop its ticking, as though by halting time itself you could undo what had been done. But time, Monsieur Morel, it does not forgive." For a long moment there was only the sound of the storm outside and the faint sobbing of Elise. Then the old man spoke, his voice low and broken. It was dark. "I told him to leave us alone. He turned to go. I thought he laughed. I struck out only to grab his arm, and he slipped. The stones were wet. I heard the crack when he fell. I tried to call for help, but the fog swallowed my voice." He buried his face in his hands. "I took the watch. I thought if they found it, they would know, they would blame me. I dropped it near him and ran." Poirot turned back, his expression grave but not unkind. "And you let them believe it had been stolen?" "Yes, I told myself it was punishment. For him, for me, for all of us." Elise clung to him, weeping softly. Poirot let them be for a moment, then said gently, "Monsieur Morel, the truth must be told, but the law is merciful when the heart is pure. The inspector will see it was an accident. Morel looked up, his eyes hollow but oddly peaceful. "Will he, Monsieur Poirot?" "Yes," Poirot said simply, "because I shall tell him myself." As we left the house, the storm began to ease. The sky broke open to reveal a sliver of pale sunlight that glimmered on the wet stones. Poirot stopped and looked back once at the old clockmaker's door. "There is something profoundly sad, Hastings," he said quietly, "about a man who tries to mend time with his hands. He forgets that it is the heart that must be repaired." I nodded, too moved to speak. Poirot gave a small, weary sigh. "And yet we are not done. There remains one thing that troubles me still." "What's that?" "The letter," he said softly. "The one found in Dering's room. Meet me by the quay at 4. It was not written by Dering, nor by Morel, nor by Elise. There is still another hand in this affair. Someone who drew them all together, and who has yet to reveal themselves." He looked out toward the sea, where the clouds gathered again on the horizon. "The game is not over, my friend. Time has stopped once, but before this is finished it shall strike again." The following day dawned cold and pale, as though the storm had washed all colour from the world. The streets of Calais were slick and deserted. The air carried the sharp tang of seaweed and smoke from the fishermen's huts. I found Poirot already dressed, sipping chocolate at the window of our small inn. He looked thoughtful, almost grave. "Ah, Hastings," he said without turning, "observe how the morning hides its face. It is ashamed, perhaps, of what the night has revealed." "You mean Morel's confession?" I asked. "Surely that settles it, doesn't it? A tragic accident, yes, but the case is done." Poirot turned then, fixing me with those sharp, glittering eyes of his. "Non, mon ami. It is almost done, which is the most dangerous state of all. When a case appears complete, yet the heart whispers, 'Something is missing,'" I sighed. "You're thinking of that letter again?" "Just so. A single line. 'Meet me by the quay at 4. No signature, no address. But the choice of words is curious, Hastings, impersonal, almost mechanical. And yet it lured Dering out on the very night he died. Why would he obey such a summons, unless he knew the sender well?" I had no answer. Poirot set down his cup and reached for his hat. "Come, Hastings. It is time we visit the harbour once more. Perhaps the sea, which gives up its dead reluctantly, will yield its secrets more freely." The town was slowly returning to life after the storm. Fishermen mended nets, shopkeepers swept their doorsteps, and a group of children chased a stray cat through the puddles. Yet there lingered a heaviness in the air, a sense of something unresolved. We paused by the place where Dering had fallen, a stretch of slippery cobbles beside the iron railings, the sea still churning below. Poirot paced the length of it with measured steps, his eyes darting here and there like a bird's. "Notice, Hastings," he said softly, "the position of the lamp-post. It would cast a long shadow at that hour." The letter named 4 o'clock, yet the watch was stopped at 4:17. 17 minutes are an eternity if one waits in the fog. I looked about uneasily. I can imagine it well enough. Cold, damp, the sea roaring below. Poirot knelt suddenly, examining a faint mark near the rail, a scrape in the stone. "Here, see this? The edge is clean, recent, and look, a small piece of torn fabric caught in the metal." "Silk, Hastings. A woman's scarf, perhaps." I bent closer. "Then the letter was from a woman." Poirot smiled faintly. "We must not run before we walk, mon ami. But yes, the possibility is most suggestive." At that moment a voice behind us said quietly, "You are wasting your time, Monsieur Poirot." We turned. A woman stood in the mist, tall and slender, wrapped in a dark cloak. Her features were sharp, her complexion pale, her eyes the cool grey of the sea. I recognized her instantly. Madame Violette Marchand, the proprietor of the Pension des Voyageurs, where Dering had been lodging before his death. "Madame Marchand," Poirot said pleasantly. "How very convenient. Were you following us?" Her lips curved faintly. "No, monsieur. I come to lay flowers. Mr. Dering was a kind guest, polite, discreet. Not many of those in my business." She knelt gracefully and placed a small bouquet by the rail. The gesture seemed oddly rehearsed, as though for an audience. Poirot regarded her keenly. "You knew him well, then?" "Well enough to know he was troubled. He spent his evenings alone walking by the sea. He received letters sometimes. I posted one myself the day before he died." "Ah." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A letter? From whom?" She met his gaze without flinching. I did not read it, of course. It was addressed in a neat hand, a woman's hand, I think. The envelope was pale blue. Poirot's expression grew thoughtful. You have an excellent memory, madame. I keep good accounts, monsieur, she said coolly. It is necessary in my trade. As she turned to go, Poirot said softly, "One moment, if you please. You have dropped your glove." She paused, surprised, and looked down. A single black glove lay at her feet. Poirot picked it up delicately between two fingers. "May I?" He turned it over. On the inside of the wrist was stitched a small monogram. Émilie Morel, Madame Marchand's face did not change, but I saw the faintest flicker in her eyes. "It is not mine," she said quietly. "Perhaps it fell from your pocket, monsieur." Poirot smiled. "Perhaps. Yet it seems curious that I, who never remove my gloves, should lose one here where a man has died." He offered it to her, but she made no move to take it. Then, with a polite nod, she turned and walked away, her figure soon swallowed by the fog. When she was gone, I exhaled sharply. "What do you make of that, Poirot?" "That she knows more than she says, Hastings." "Much more. You think she sent the letter?" "Possibly. Or she delivered it for another." He tucked the glove carefully into his pocket. "But this is most interesting. Elise's initials. The young lady has not told us everything, I fear." We returned to the inn in silence. Poirot seemed preoccupied, pacing the room, muttering to himself in that odd mixture of French and English that always heralded some great revelation. At last he stopped. "There are 3 women in this story, Hastings. The mother, who is dead, the daughter, who hides the truth, and the landlady who observes everything. Between them one holds the key. The key to what? To why the clock stopped at 4:17. I threw up my hands. "You've said that before, Poirot, but what does it matter?" The old man confessed. Poirot shook his head. He confessed to the act, yes, but not to the reason. One does not stop a watch at a random time. The choice of hour, it is symbolic, deliberate, and yet there is a pattern that escapes me. He went to his case, drew out his small notebook, and opened it to a page filled with neat, square handwriting. There he had copied the words of the letter. "Meet me by the quay at 4. I have something to return to you." Poirot tapped the final sentence. "Something to return to you." What, Hastings, was to be returned? Not the watch. That came from Morel himself. No, this speaks of another exchange entirely. I frowned. Money, perhaps? Or a token? Something of sentimental value? Poirot's eyes narrowed. Yes, perhaps that. He was still frowning when there came a timid knock at the door. It was Elise Morel. Her face was drawn, her hands clasped tightly before her. "Monsieur Poirot, I had to come. The police say they will not leave us alone. They say Papa must go to Calais for questioning. I don't know what to do." Poirot led her gently to a chair. "Courage, mademoiselle. Your father will not suffer unjustly. But first you must help me. Tell me, do you own a pair of black gloves with your initials stitched inside?" She looked startled. Yes, I do. They were a gift from Mr. Daring." "Huh?" said Poirot softly. "Then you were closer than you told us." She flushed deeply. He was kind to me. He said he had known my mother long ago. He gave me small presents, books, a scarf, those gloves. I thought it only friendship. And did he write to you?" She hesitated. "Once or twice. He asked me to meet him, but I did not go. I was afraid Papa would misunderstand." Poirot's eyes shone. "And yet one night you did go, did you not? You went to the quay." Elise stared at him in horror. "How did you know?" "The sea tells me everything, mademoiselle," he said softly. "You went at 4 o'clock because you had received the letter, but when you arrived he was already gone, dead." She covered her face with her hands. Yes, I saw him lying there. I thought Papa had done it. I panicked. I ran. I dropped my glove. Oh, Monsieur Poirot, I never meant to deceive you." Poirot's tone softened. "And you told no one?" "How could I? The police would not have believed me. And I could not bear to see my father accused." Poirot nodded slowly. "You were not wrong to fear, mademoiselle. But you see now your silence has protected another." She looked up sharply. "Another?" "Oui," said Poirot. "The one who wrote that letter. The one who meant for your uncle and your father to meet, knowing what would happen when they did. Elise whispered. You mean someone wanted him dead? Poirot looked toward the window, where the fog was thickening once more. Yes, mademoiselle. Someone wound this clock with exquisite care, and before it strikes again, we must discover who holds the key. The rain had stopped, but the air that evening was thick and heavy, like the calm before another storm. The sun, low in the sky, cast a strange copper glow over the harbour, tinting the wet cobblestones and the shop fronts with the colour of old brass. Every sound seemed unnaturally sharp, the cry of a gull, the echo of footsteps, the faint ticking of 100 clocks from the narrow lane where Jacques Morel's workshop stood. Poirot and I stood before the door, which hung slightly ajar. Inside, the familiar ticking seemed louder than ever, a chorus of different tones, steady, erratic, fast, slow, blending into something like the breath of a living creature. I have often thought, Hastings, Poirot murmured, that a workshop such as this is a temple to time itself. Listen, it beats, it breathes, it judges, I shivered. It sounds more like it condemns, perhaps, said Poirot, stepping inside. But tonight it shall speak. The old clockmaker sat in his chair by the fire, pale but composed. Elise was with him, her eyes red from crying. She rose as we entered, but Poirot gestured for her to remain seated. Mademoiselle, he said softly, you have been very brave. Now we must ask one final effort of you, a performance, if you will. Her brow furrowed. A performance? Yes, you will act as though nothing has changed. Your father will behave as he always does. You will wind the clocks, tidy the shop, speak with the customer who is about to arrive. Customer? She repeated. Who? Poirot smiled faintly. The one who set this whole tragedy in motion. I stared at him. You mean you know who wrote the letter? Poirot's eyes gleamed. I have known since this morning. But proof, Hastings. Proof is the last tick of the mechanism, and for that we must wait. He went to the workbench and adjusted a small clock, his movements precise and unhurried. At exactly 7 o'clock someone will come to this door. Mademoiselle, when they do, you must greet them as you did Mr. Daring. Say nothing of what has happened. Simply offer them the watch. The golden one? She asked, startled. Just so. It has served as bait once before, it shall do so again. We did not have long to wait. The light outside faded from gold to grey, and the workshop was lit only by the glow of the fire and the trembling reflections of the clock's glass faces. The air was thick with tension. Even Hastings, usually restless, stood motionless beside the window. Then, precisely as the clock on the mantelpiece struck 7, there came a gentle knock at the door. Elise froze. Poirot gave her a single nod. She opened it. Standing there, cloaked and gloved, was Madame Violette Marchand. Her eyes swept the room, cool, assessing, unafraid. Good evening, Mademoiselle Morel. I am sorry to intrude. I came to inquire after your father. I heard he was unwell. Poirot stepped from the shadows. How considerate of you, madame. For the first time, a flicker of surprise crossed her face. Monsieur Poirot, I had not expected. Few do, he said lightly. Please enter. We are all friends here. She hesitated, then stepped inside. The door closed softly behind her, shutting out the faint hum of the sea. Poirot gestured to the chair opposite Morel. Do sit, madame. You have an interest in timepieces, I think? She smiled faintly. I admire good craftsmanship, yes. Then you will admire this, Poirot said, taking up the golden watch from the workbench. A fine work, is it not? A gift once meant for a man you knew well, Mr. Albert Daring. Her smile faltered just slightly. Yes, I heard about his death. A great shock to us all. A shock, Poirot said softly, but not a surprise. You expected it, did you not? Her chin lifted. Monsieur, you go too far. Poirot set the watch on the table, its gleaming surface catching the firelight. Then tell me, madame, how did you come by this? He drew from his pocket the pale blue envelope she had described earlier, its contents removed, but the handwriting clearly visible. She looked at it, too calmly. I do not know what you mean, non, said Poirot quietly. That will not do. You posted this letter yourself. It summoned Daring to the quay where he met his death. You used a woman's hand so that suspicion would fall upon Elise, knowing she would never defend herself. But tell me why. Madame Marchand rose slowly. This is absurd. You have no evidence. Poirot smiled faintly. But I do, madam. You see, you made one mistake. You wrote that letter not in ink, but in blue pencil, the same kind used to mark your guest accounts at the pension. And when you wrote the word return, you pressed too hard. The indentation remained on the page beneath. It was an invoice for Mr. Daring's room. A faint hiss escaped her lips. You searched my office? I observed, madame. Observation is not intrusion. Morel gave a weak cry. Why would you do this? She turned toward him, her face hard now, stripped of its politeness. Because he ruined me, both of them. Daring and your wife. Years ago, before she left England, she was my friend. I trusted her, and she took everything. My designs, my name, my future. Daring helped her. They betrayed me, and I was left with nothing but debts and shame. Her voice trembled with fury. I found her years later, here married to you, living happily while I scraped by running a lodging house. And then she died, but you prospered still. I waited, I watched. When her brother returned, I saw my chance. Poirot's eyes were cold now, the gentleness gone. So you lured him here, knowing his remorse would drive him to seek forgiveness. You wrote the letter, hoping he would meet Morel and that their old hatred would do your work for you. She gave a short, bitter laugh. I only gave fate a nudge, Monsieur Poirot. I did not push him. Elise rose, her face white with horror. You're saying you wanted my father to kill him? I wanted justice, she hissed. For 20 years I lived in the shadow of her sin. Now it is paid for. Poirot stepped forward, his voice low but cutting. No, madame. It is you who will pay. You wound the spring, you set the hands, you made the clock strike death. And now the mechanism is complete. For a long moment no one moved. Then the ticking filled the silence again, louder, faster, as though all the clocks had found their voice at once. Madame Marchand turned suddenly, her cloak swirling, and made for the door. But before she could reach it, Inspector Lefebvre appeared in the doorway, his revolver drawn. Madame Violette Marchand, he said curtly, you will come with me. She froze, then turned slowly to face Poirot. You think you've won, little man? You think time is on your side? Poirot's expression did not change. No, madame. But the truth always is. When she was gone, the room seemed to breathe again. Hlas sank to her knees beside her father, who sat trembling, his face buried in his hands. Poirot replaced the golden watch on the mantel, where it gleamed faintly in the firelight. There, Hastings, he said quietly. The clock has stopped at last. I looked at him in awe. You knew she'd come. Of course. When a woman like Madame Marchand sees her careful plan begin to crumble, she cannot resist returning to the scene. Pride Hastings is the truest timekeeper of all. He gave a small sigh. But remember this, every mechanism, however fine, must one day run down. The mainspring of revenge is no exception. Outside the night had deepened, but the air was calm again, the sea gentler now under a rising moon. As we walked back toward the inn, the distant chime of a church clock echoed over the town. Midnight already, I said softly. Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, Hastings, midnight, the end and the beginning. Time always renews itself, but for some it stops forever at the hour of 4:17. It was the morning after Madame Marchand's arrest. The harbour was still grey, the air crisp with salt, and the town at last seemed to breathe again. The newspapers carried the headline in bold print. Calais landlady confesses to forged letter, clockmaker cleared. Hastings read it aloud as Poirot stirred his coffee at the little café by the quay. The sea glimmered faintly beyond the windows, calm and deceptively innocent. Well, that's that, Poirot, Hastings said with a relieved smile. The inspector says Madame Marchand will be charged with conspiracy to murder. Morel and his daughter are free. You've done it again. Poirot did not look up. He said only in that non-committal tone that always made Hastings nervous. You don't look pleased with yourself, Hastings said. I should think you'd be delighted. Poirot gave a little shrug. Delighted, yes, but content. None. There is a difference, my friend. Hastings frowned. Surely you don't doubt her guilt? Her guilt? No, but I doubt her alone guilt. He tapped his teaspoon against the saucer once, twice, precisely. You see, Hastings, the case is too neat. It ends too cleanly. Madame Marchand writes a letter. 2 men meet, one dies, one flees, et voilà. The police are satisfied. But I'm not a policeman. He leaned back, eyes narrowing toward the key. Do you recall what she said, Hastings? That she gave Fate a nudge. A nudge, mind you, not a push. Fate then must have had another hand. Later that morning, Poirot insisted we pay one final visit to the Morel house. Elise greeted us warmly but with tired eyes. The old clockmaker himself looked frailer, his hands shaking as he tried to polish a small brass pendulum. Papa insists on working, Elise said softly. He says the clocks keep him calm. Poirot smiled kindly. It is well. Routine is a balm to the mind. But tell me, mademoiselle, have the clocks all been set right again? Yes, she said. I made sure of it myself. Poirot's gaze flicked across the shelves. All except one, I think. Elise followed his eyes to a tall grandfather clock in the corner, its pendulum motionless. That one stopped during the storm, she explained. Papa said the damp got into the mechanism. Indeed. Poirot walked over and examined it. The face was tarnished, the glass slightly misted, but the hand stood stubbornly at 4:17. He traced the edge of the casing with one fingertip, his expression unreadable. Curious, he murmured. Most curious. What's wrong with it? I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he opened the case, revealing the polished brass weights and gears within. They gleamed faintly, untouched by dust. A storm may stop a clock, yes, Poirot said softly. But it does not wind it backwards. Elise frowned. Backwards? Poirot pointed to a faint scratch on the inside rim of the casing. A circular mark. This clock was tampered with. Its hands were turned back deliberately. By whom? Hastings asked. That, Hastings, is what we are about to discover. He asked Elise for permission to look through the back room, the same workshop where her father's tools lay neatly arranged. The smell of oil and brass hung in the air. Poirot moved among the benches like a cat, inspecting, touching nothing. At last he stopped before a small box on a high shelf. Mademoiselle, whose is this? Elise looked puzzled. That? It belonged to Lucas Brenet, Papa's apprentice. He left it behind when he vanished the night Mr. Daring died. Ah, Poirot said softly. The elusive Lucas. How convenient that he disappeared precisely then. He opened the box carefully. Inside lay several clock springs, a screwdriver, and a folded piece of paper. Poirot opened it and read aloud, If he learns the truth, everything will be lost. She must not tell him. The time must stay as it is, 4:17. Elise went pale. What does that mean? Who wrote it? Poirot's expression darkened. That, mademoiselle, is the handwriting of your father. She stared in disbelief. No, you're wrong. Poirot shook his head gently. I never mistake handwriting. You see, he tried to disguise it. A heavier hand, a rougher stroke. But the flourish of the F and the spacing of the numbers, unmistakable. Hastings looked astonished. But why would Morel write such a thing? Because, Poirot said quietly, the clockmaker, my friend, was still hiding something. They found Morel slumped in his chair by the fire, breathing shallowly, his eyes closed. Elise rushed to him, but he raised a trembling hand. I heard, he whispered. I knew this would come. Poirot crouched beside him, his voice calm and steady. Monsieur Morel, you told us Daring's death was an accident. That much I believe. But you did more than flee, did you not? You returned to the workshop, and you found your apprentice waiting. Morel's eyelids fluttered. Lucas, yes, he saw you come in, blood on your sleeve. He guessed what had happened. You begged him to help you, to hide the truth, to stop the clocks, to set them all to the hour that had destroyed your life before. 4:17, the time your wife died. A tear slid down the old man's cheek. I wanted to freeze it, to stop the pain. Poirot's tone softened, but Lucas was clever, too clever. He realized the police would suspect him, the apprentice who vanished. So he made his own bargain. He took money from Madame Marchand, yes, she who watched from her window, always listening, always waiting. She paid him to deliver her letter, to make sure the meeting took place. Morel buried his face in his hands. I thought he had gone to England. Poirot's gaze was grave. No, monsieur. He remained here, hidden, until the storm. Then, perhaps fearing discovery, He tried to destroy what might betray him, his tools, his notes, this letter. But time, you see, keeps its records. He rose, looking down at the frail man. Lucas Brenet was not a victim of circumstance. He was the silent witness, the one who saw the crime, who helped conceal it, and who profited from it. But when the storm broke, so did his courage. He fled to sea, and the sea, mon ami, does not forgive. A knock came at the door. Inspector Lefebvre entered, hat in hand. "Pardon, Monsieur Poirot," he said briskly, "but they've found something. A fishing boat wrecked near the pier. There's a body inside. A young man, about 20. Papers identify him as Lucas Brenet." Elise gasped. "Oh, no." Poirot inclined his head gravely. "Then at last the circle is complete. The watchmaker, the pupil, the deceiver, the betrayed. Time, Hastings. It has stopped for them all." When Lefebvre departed, silence fell again in the little workshop. The clocks ticked softly, each one in its own rhythm. Poirot stood before the great-grandfather clock and set the pendulum swinging once more. "Let it run, mademoiselle," he said quietly. "Your father sought to halt time, but you must not. Let it move forward, for that is the only justice left." Elise nodded through her tears. "And you, Monsieur Poirot, you will stay for the inquest?" He smiled faintly. "Alas, no. There is a train to London this evening, and my little grey cells demand rest. But take comfort. Your father's burden is ended. He has spoken the truth at last." As we left, I glanced back. The golden watch gleamed faintly on the mantelpiece, its hands ticking once more, no longer stopped at that cursed hour. For the first time the house seemed peaceful. Outside, the gulls wheeled above the harbour, their cries thin against the rising wind. Poirot paused on the quay, watching the tide creep in. "Well, Hastings," he said softly, "our little adventure comes to an end. Do you think they'll all find peace now?" He smiled, a small, wistful smile. "Peace, yes, but not forgetfulness. Time does not heal, mon ami. It remembers, always." The journey back to England was a sombre one. The Channel, restless and grey beneath the autumn sky, rolled heavily against the steamer's hull as we stood upon the deck. Poirot had wrapped himself in his thick overcoat, his hat tilted just so, his hands neatly folded on the rail. He looked, as always, immaculate, but there was a gravity in his eyes that even the brisk sea air could not dispel. For a long time he said nothing, merely watched the waves churn below. Then at last, in that quiet, thoughtful voice of his, he spoke. "Hastings, mon ami, do you ever consider how small a thing it is that may set all the machinery of tragedy in motion?" I gave a little laugh. "Good Lord, Poirot, you sound quite the philosopher." "I should say it was rather a large thing in this case, a murder, a scandal, a forgery." He raised one delicate hand. No. You mistake me. It began with something smaller. A missed train, a quarrel, an unspoken word, perhaps even a stopped clock." I glanced at him. "You mean Morel's clock?" Poirot nodded slowly. "Yes, think of it, Hastings. The hour of a wife's death becomes the hour that defines a life. Every tick thereafter, a reminder of what is lost. A man winds his clocks backward, and with them he winds back his sanity. What a fragile thing is the human mind, when time itself turns enemy." He gave a small melancholy sigh and turned away from the sea. "But come, enough of sadness. Tell me, what do you think of Mademoiselle Elise now?" "She's suffered terribly," I said, "but she has courage. She'll recover, I think." Poirot's eyes glimmered faintly. "Perhaps. She has the courage, yes, and something more dangerous, pride. Pride may heal, or it may destroy again." I stared. "You think she's still hiding something?" He smiled faintly. "Perhaps not deliberately. But secrets, mon ami, have a way of clinging to a family, like dust upon a clock. One may polish, yet still a speck remains. When we reached London that night, it was raining, a soft, relentless drizzle that blurred the lamps and turned the pavements into ribbons of gold. Poirot declared that we should dine at Simpson's to celebrate the closure of the case. His words, though I noticed the faint irony in his tone. Over roast beef and a fine bottle of Burgundy, he appeared almost cheerful again, yet I could tell his mind was elsewhere. At last, as the waiter cleared the plates, he reached into his breast pocket and drew out a small brown envelope. "From Inspector Lefebvre," he said, "delivered just as we left Calais. I did not open it. I wished to enjoy the Channel crossing in peace. He broke the seal and unfolded the contents. There were 2 sheets of paper and a small photograph, old faded with a crease running through it. Poirot studied it silently. Then he passed it to me. It showed 3 people, Morel, younger and smiling, Daring, stout and prosperous, and between them, a woman with kind eyes and a soft expression. Beneath it was scrawled in elegant handwriting. For the time we shared, I looked up. That's the torn photograph you found in the library. But this one, it's whole. Poirot nodded gravely. Yes, you recall, Hastings, the one we saw in Calais had the woman's face torn away. Now we see it restored. And we also see, perhaps, the true beginning of this affair. He handed me Lefebvre's note. It read simply, recovered from the possessions of Lucas Brunet. The woman is not Elise Morel's mother as assumed, but Mrs. Albert Daring. I stared at him. You mean Daring's wife? Just so. Poirot leaned back, fingertips pressed together. You see, my friend, the connection between Daring and Morel was not merely professional. They shared more than business. They shared affection for the same woman. But good heavens, I said. Are you suggesting that Elise Morel, he said softly, was not Morel's daughter at all, but Daring's? The revelation struck me dumb for a moment. Poirot watched me with quiet amusement. Do you begin to see, Hastings, how neatly it all fits? Why Daring would meet her in secret at the pier. Why he promised her security, perhaps even recognition, and why Madame Marchand, ever the gossip, thought she could use that knowledge for gain. I felt a chill. Then Elise killed her own father without knowing it, Poirot finished. Yes, a cruel irony, n'est-ce pas? He smiled faintly at my expression. Do not look so stricken, my dear Hastings. The law will never learn this truth. It changes nothing of her guilt, nor of her suffering. It is merely another cog in the great mechanism of fate. I swallowed hard. And you'll keep it to yourself? Of course. There is no virtue in cruelty, Hastings. Sometimes truth must stop at the edge of mercy. It was several days later that a small parcel arrived at Poirot's flat in Whitehaven Mansions. I was there when he received it. A neat little box tied with twine, the postmark from Calais. Inside lay a single object, the golden timepiece itself. On the back, beneath the tiny star that marked Morel's craftsmanship, a new engraving had been added in delicate script. To Monsieur Poirot, who set time right again. Poirot's face softened. Ah, he said quietly, that is very pretty. But look, Hastings, see here. He pressed the catch and opened the lid. Beneath the dial, hidden within the fine mechanism, was a second plate of gold. On it was inscribed another message, much older and fainter. For Elise, when the truth of time is known. We both stared at it. Poirot closed the watch gently and replaced it in its box. So, I said slowly, she knows. Perhaps not consciously, Poirot said. Perhaps she found it while polishing. Perhaps she merely felt it, that some secret, some sorrow remained within the ticking of that little heart. But she chose to send it to me, not keep it. That, Hastings, is the mark of wisdom. She has chosen to let time move forward. He stood gazing out through the rain-slick window. You see, my friend, that is why I love these small human tragedies. Beneath the lies, the murder, the grief, there is always some quiet gesture of grace. A girl sending away her inheritance of sorrow. A clockmaker seeking forgiveness in the turning of gears. It is, how shall I say it, the order of things restored. That night, long after I had gone home, Poirot sat alone at his desk. The golden watch ticked softly beside him, its rhythm steady, soothing. The lamplight gleamed upon its case. Outside, London murmured. Carriages, rain, distant bells. He wrote a short note and placed it inside the box before sealing it again for safekeeping. Later he would tell me its contents only in passing. It is not for the world to know, Hastings, he said. Only for the conscience to remember. When he at last rose to retire, he paused at the mantel and looked up at the small clock above it. The hands stood at 4:17. For a long moment he regarded it in silence. Then with deliberate care he set it right. Winter had come early to the south of France. The sea at Calais turned a deeper, colder grey, and the gulls flew lower, their cries thin against the wind. A soft rain drifted inland from the coast, wrapping the town in a haze that blurred its corners and softened its sorrow. It was to this mournful setting that we returned. Some 3 months after the affair of the Golden Watch had ended, Poirot had received a letter, short, formal, but written in a hand we both recognized. Monsieur Poirot, my father's time has ended. I ask only that you be here when he is laid to rest. There are things you should hear. Elise Morland so, though he grumbled about the dampness of the French air and the shocking condition of foreign railway timetables, Poirot came. He said little on the journey, but his eyes, usually so bright with calculation, were subdued, reflective, almost kind. The funeral was held in the small cemetery behind the church on the hill. Few attended. Elise, pale but composed, the old librarian, the blacksmith, and 1 or 2 townsfolk who had once bought clocks from the old man's shop. The coffin, plain oak with no ornament, was carried through the mist. As the priest's voice rose softly over the sound of the wind, I looked at Poirot. He stood a little apart, his hat in his hands, his head bowed. When the coffin was lowered, he murmured only one phrase, "Le temps s'est arrêté." Time has stopped. Afterwards, we walked with Elise back toward the house. The air smelled faintly of the sea and rain. She wore no veil, only a dark coat that made her seem older than her years. When she spoke, her voice was calm, almost detached. "My father left a letter for you, Monsieur Poirot. He said you would understand it better than anyone." She handed him a small envelope sealed with wax. Poirot thanked her gravely and slipped it into his pocket without opening it. "And you, mademoiselle?" he asked gently. "What will you do now?" She looked toward the harbour. "Sell the shop, perhaps. Leave Calais. There are too many clocks here, and too many memories." Poirot inclined his head. "A wise decision. But before you go, one question, if I may. The golden timepiece, you sent it to me." "Why?" Elise smiled faintly. "Because it never belonged to me, Monsieur Poirot. It belonged to Truth, and you were the only one who could keep it safe." That evening, as the storm gathered over the sea, Poirot and I sat once more in the clockmaker's empty workshop. The benches were bare, the tools neatly packed away. Only one clock still ticked, the tall one in the corner, the same that had been stopped at 4:17. Poirot drew Morel's letter from his pocket and broke the seal. The paper was thin, the handwriting trembled, but the words were clear. To Hercule Poirot, who sees beyond the face of time. You were right. I could not bear the hour that took her from me. Every tick after that seemed a mockery. When Albert Dering came again, speaking of forgiveness, I wanted only silence. But it was not I who killed him. It was the hour itself, that cursed 4:17 that ruled us both. When I saw Elise kneeling beside him, I knew the truth at once. She had learned from her mother's blood and mine what happens when pride meets love. I took the blame because I had already taken everything else from her. Her childhood, her peace, her name. You will find beneath the base of the golden timepiece a second spring, finer than any I have made. It does not mark seconds, but regrets. It will never stop until it is forgiven. J. Morel Poirot read it twice, then folded it very carefully and placed it back inside the envelope. "So," he said quietly, "the old clockmaker still tries to measure sorrow in gears and springs. Poor man." I said nothing. The ticking of the clock filled the silence. At last Poirot rose and crossed to the great clock in the corner. He opened the glass door, adjusted the pendulum slightly, and closed it again. The sound changed, from an uneven, broken rhythm to a steady, gentle beat. "Now it keeps good time," he murmured. "It was never the mechanism that failed, you see, Hastings, only the hand that feared to let it move." We left the workshop then and walked down to the harbour. The tide was full, the water black and gleaming. The rain had stopped, but the mist clung low over the sea. Gellie stood by the pier alone, holding a small bundle in her hands. She turned as we approached. "I wanted to see it go," she said softly. "His last clock." In the bundle was a small unfinished pocket watch, brass, not gold. The face was blank, the case unpolished. She held it out over the water. "For all that was lost," she whispered, and let it fall. We watched as it sank, leaving only ripples behind. Poirot bowed his head. "Do you think," I asked quietly, "that she will ever forgive herself?" Poirot's eyes followed the widening rings upon the water. "In time," he said, "but not in time as the clockmaker measured it." Her forgiveness will not be counted in seconds or hours, but in the slow, merciful rhythm of forgetting. That night, at the small inn by the shore, Poirot sat by the fire, the golden timepiece resting on the table beside him. Its soft ticking seemed louder in the stillness. I could not sleep, so I joined him. "You're thinking of Morel," I said. "Of all of them," he replied quietly. "Of Daring, of Elise, of the apprentice, even of Madame Marchand. Each wound themselves upon the same spring, guilt, love, pride, and when it broke they all stopped together." He looked up at me suddenly. "Tell me, Hastings, what is time?" I blinked. "Good Lord, Poirot, you're asking me." "Yes, you, mon ami, what is it? A measurement, a rhythm, a punishment?" I hesitated. "It's what passes, what keeps us moving forward." He smiled faintly. "Ah, forward. That is the only direction, is it not? Even when we wish to turn back." He leaned over the table, his fingers brushing the golden case. "Oh, you see, Hastings, that is what poor Morel never understood. He tried to master time, to trap it, to silence it. But time does not serve man. It only observes him. It watches patiently until we tire, until we surrender, and then it closes its hand." He shut the watch gently, and the ticking ceased. "There," he said softly. "Even silence has its rhythm." The next morning, before we left Calais for good, Poirot placed the golden timepiece on the church altar. No one saw him do it. He asked for no blessing, no ceremony. He merely left it there, gleaming faintly in the first light of dawn. When we reached the railway station, he paused at the platform, watching the sea through the misted glass. "Hastings," he said, "you remember the first time we came here. You said the town seemed asleep, as though it were waiting." "Yes," I said. "And now?" "Now," he murmured, "it has awakened. The clocks run again." As the train began to move, the church bells struck the hour behind us, slow, deliberate chimes that carried far over the rooftops. Poirot smiled faintly, tilting his head to listen. "The last chime," he said, "and perhaps the first."